Hello. Let's take a closer look at the latest weather situation in South Asia, where the ferocious heat wave that's been gripping northern India and Pakistan has delivered temperatures of more than 50 degrees Celsius over the last few days. But in Islamabad, there has been a brief respite. During Tuesday, this area of cloud worked its way through a weather system that's delivered some strong and gusty winds, kicking up a lot of dust and sand. But we also saw some outbreaks of rain, bringing a brief respite from the heat. Only a brief cool down though, because temperatures for Thursday afternoon are expected to get up to 40 degrees. Once again, there will be parts of Pakistan that get close to 50 degrees. It does look like we will see something a little cooler over the coming days, but the heat is then set to return. Now, if we're looking for a long-lasting, significant cool down, that won't come until the arrival of the southwest monsoon. But the monsoon is starting to show its hand now. On the earlier satellite picture, you can see extensive cloud cover down towards the south of the region, still a long way from Pakistan. Now, this line shows where we've officially seen the arrival of the monsoon, the northward extent, if you like, just fringing into the far south of Sri Lanka, and certainly across the south of the Bay of Bengal. But even to the north of that, we've started to see some pre-monsoon downpours. In fact, the forecast for the next 5 days will bring a lot of rain across southwestern parts of India, also some parts of Myanmar and Thailand. Now, in a few spots, we're likely to see in excess of 300, maybe 400 millimetres of rain. This chart shows the rainfall accumulations we're expecting over the next 5 days. But notice, northwestern parts of India, Pakistan, where we could really do with some rain, there is none in the forecast. Rain unlikely to arrive for some of these areas until we get into the start of July.
Now showing on BBC Real.
Throughout history, groups known as cults have led ordinary people to believe unbelievable things.
Why do people join cults?
The message of the cult or the cult leader, it has to resonate with the person, right? When people are at vulnerable moments in their life, they're kind of open to hearing some solution. And then at that moment, if someone comes along with an interesting message or someone invites you to something, you're more likely to say yes.
One has to understand there's deception, whether overt lying or withholding vital information or distorting it to make it palatable for people.
In my experience, it just started off over meeting with people over coffee and not knowing that I was getting drawn into a cult. That's the crazy thing about it. It could easily happen to anyone.
Watch more stories like this at bbc.com/real.
Need your fix of the beautiful game? Then head to the BBC Sport website and app. With goal alerts, score predictions and top punditry. Go online or download the app now.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Amroliwala. On today's Global, we have two special reports on the changing face of Afghanistan under the Taliban. The BBC films patrols by the Department of Vice and Virtue enforcing strict new Islamic laws.
He said, "You're very shameless women. This is not the Afghan Republic. Now it's the Islamic Emirate. You cannot do whatever you want anymore."
We'll also hear about the secret schools opening up in Afghanistan as girls remain banned from secondary education. Also on the programme, a Russian soldier pleads guilty to killing an unarmed civilian in Ukraine's first war crimes trial since the conflict started. Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands and Belgium announced plans to increase wind power tenfold as they try to wean off Russian energy supplies. And temperatures in South Asia, once predicted to occur every 300 years, could now be experienced 3 times a decade, according to a new report. Hello and welcome to BBC News. We start with a special report from Afghanistan and the changing face under Taliban rule. The Ministry for Preventing Vice and Promoting Virtue has been behind a raft of new hardline laws, many of them targeting women. Only recently they announced the face veil will be compulsory in public. The BBC's Afghanistan correspondent has been given exclusive access to a team of inspectors from the ministry. Sukunda Kamani is in Kabul and begins our coverage.
When the Taliban first seized power last August, they initially appeared to be adopting a more flexible attitude than many had feared. We didn't see these kind of new laws governing what women should wear, how men should act, for example, being brought into place, at least not in big cities like here in Kabul. That's changing, and it's changing very significantly. And these inspectors from the Ministry of Vice and Virtue are at the very forefront of it. At the moment, you still do see, I have to say, large numbers of women in places like Kabul with their faces uncovered, but wearing headscarves, because enforcement is still, it seems, being introduced. But just earlier today, we saw video released from outside one university in Kabul where Taliban members were telling female students that they shouldn't wear brightly coloured clothes. Here's our report on our patrol alongside the inspectors of the Ministry of Vice and Virtue. Meet the inspectors of the Ministry of Vice and Virtue. With branches across the country, they're remoulding Afghanistan to fit in with the Taliban's hard-line beliefs. And how often do you do this in a week? Every day. Every day. We're following one team in the centre of Kabul. First stop, a shopping centre. Bystanders and shopkeepers are given a lecture on the importance of saying your prayers and growing a beard, though it's all framed as brotherly advice. If you have any problems, we can help you, Maulvi Mahmood Fateh tells them. You haven't been talking about women, about what they should wear. That's what your ministry is most known for at the moment.
We have already given advice to the owner of the shopping center and put up some posters, but we can't interact with individuals. For example, stopping a woman and asking her, "Why are you not wearing the correct hijab?" My manners and religion do not permit me to do that.
So if you see a woman here who's got her head covered but not her face covered, you won't say anything to her?
We can distinguish between a woman with hijab and without. If a woman is completely crossing the limits without any modesty or veil, then we will try to find her male guardian.
In such a conservative country, it's not clear which women he means. Many already cover their faces. In cities like Kabul, others simply cover their hair. This is how the Taliban say they should all be dressing now. What right does your ministry have to tell them how they should practice their religion, how they should dress?
It is not the decree of the ministry, it's the decree of God. The real cause of moral corruption is the face. If the face is not covered, then what is the point of hijab?
The inspectors are on the move. Next up, a bus stop. Their ministry has a fearsome reputation from their role during the Taliban's previous regime, when offenders would be regularly beaten. But here, their focus is on ensuring men don't get too close to female passengers. Certainly in front of us, these Vice and Virtue inspectors are behaving politely, gently with the public. Is that always the case when cameras are not around for teams right across the country? Local residents we spoke to off camera had no complaints about these inspectors, but many worry the Taliban are growing increasingly repressive. Layla Basim is an activist who was on board a bus stopped by Vice and Virtue inspectors.
Some women had their faces covered. Others, like me, were wearing black gowns and face masks. I said to the inspector, "There's no one without hijab here." He became very angry but wouldn't even look at me. He said, "You're very shameless women. This is not the Afghan Republic. Now it's the Islamic Emirat. You cannot do whatever you want anymore."
The Taliban initially appeared more flexible than many expected, but they're becoming increasingly hard-line. Despite an economic crisis, tightening social restrictions seems their priority, and the path ahead for the country looks deeply uncertain. Well, I'm pleased to say I'm joined here live in Kabul by academic Faiz Zaland, who's been a regular guest of ours on the BBC, commenting on life under the Taliban over the past 9 months. Mr. Zaland, tell me, we do certainly seem to have seen a hardening of the Taliban stance in recent weeks and months. Do you think that was the plan all along when they took power last August, to start off slowly and then show their true colours, or has there been a change in mindset within the group?
I think Taliban are slowly and gradually they are getting back to the mindset which is somehow governing over the Taliban as a group, as a movement. They have believed that they are religious, ideological, and Afghan traditional movement. So once they are getting back in power, they are not only sliding toward 90s, but they are also sliding toward the pretty much definition and interpretation of the Sharia law as they have in their mindset, and also the traditions that they follow. They are more rural movement than urban. In rural Afghanistan, the area that they belong to, there are some strictness. There are some traditional rules that they have grown up with that. So they are bringing that to urban the same way as they have done in 90s. But this time it has taken time, and it will take more time to be as strict as they were in the past.
Now to the war in Ukraine. A Russian soldier has pleaded guilty to killing a 62-year-old civilian in the first war crimes trial in Ukraine since the conflict began. The incident took place in the Sumy region in the northeast of the country in the early days of the war. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, has more from Kyiv.
Today, the first to go on trial, the young Russian soldier, 21 years old and looking even younger than his years, and very nervous as he looked through the glass box at his translator. He said that he accepted a guilty plea in the killing of a 62-year-old man who, we understand, was on a bicycle in the northeastern city of Sumy, and he'd been shot in the back. We've just heard from the Prosecutor General that there will be another trial beginning in the central Poltava region of Ukraine. 2 Russian soldiers in this case, 2 more accused of killing unarmed civilians. The Ukrainians say they have thousands of cases that they are investigating. And we've heard now from the security chiefs that they have now discovered the remains of 1,300 bodies around the region of the capital, Kyiv, where we are today. Every single body, every single remain has a horrific story behind it. Our Ukraine correspondent has been to see one man who lost 6 members of his entire family in one Russian missile strike. Here's his story.
With extraordinary composure and detail, Ivan shows me what he's lost.
We found my mother dead on a fridge here, and then we kept searching.
200 meters away, he found his brother next to his dog. Then he found his grandmother covered in bricks. Then his 1-year-old daughter on a sofa, still breathing. Then his wife. Then his father.
It was a horror, very scary and hard to understand. You hope that someone was still alive, hiding in a basement.
All he's left with are memories and pictures. Polina died the same day. Ivan lost 6 of his family. This is the police station where Ivan was working when his home was hit. Now, Ivan isn't interested in justice. In his words, he wants the Russians who carried out that attack to die inside Ukraine, to send a message. But the police force he works for says it is working towards holding those Russians to account. But that is a long way off, if it happens at all. Ivan is given an award for courage He helped people escape after the Russians moved in, even after losing everything.
My relatives are upset, crying, especially when we go to a cemetery and see 6 graves there. Every time you go there, you cry.
Well, that latest report. And Lise, before you go, let me ask you a question about Mariupol. What is the latest you're hearing about the number of fighters now out? And I suppose more importantly, what is likely to happen to them?
Well, the Russians say that nearly 1,000 soldiers, members of the Azov regiment, have now left the Azov steelworks. They started leaving when the Ukrainian authorities announced, in their words, the end of combat missions, the end of what has been one of the most brutal battles in this war. The Russians, of course, are now saying that they have surrendered. They have put out photographs showing some of the soldiers who were critically injured getting medical treatment now in Russian hospitals. The Ukrainians had been sending assurances in their public remarks that they hoped that there would be a prisoner of war swap. Russia has said nothing of this, and there have been calls in Russia by judicial officials to investigate some of the men for possible crimes against civilians, even to put them on trial. Russia is calling some of them Nazis. So there's great concern among the family members of these soldiers, among many Ukrainians, about what will be their fate.
Lise Doucette in Kyiv. Now, Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands and Belgium have announced plans to increase wind power in the North Sea tenfold by 2050. The European Union is trying to wean itself off Russian energy by transforming the continent's North Sea from an oil field into a green powerhouse. From the west coast of Denmark, Adrian Murray has sent this report.
It's a rocky boat ride out to this wind farm 30 kilometres from the Danish coast. More than 90 turbines are making enough green electricity for 200,000 homes. Workers stay out here 7 days on, 7 days off, braving the windiest of weather.
It can be really rough and things changes quickly.
Klaus and Carsten are about to service a turbine.
We go to a turbine and take some oil samples and send them to shore.
Standing beneath these turbines makes you feel incredibly small. They tower more than 100 metres above the sea. Denmark is a leader in this technology, and around half of its electricity comes from wind energy. But across the EU, it's just 14%. Now, together with Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium, Denmark wants to turn this huge stretch of water into a green power plant.
It holds one of the world's absolutely strongest wind resources. The remarkable thing is that offshore wind today is, together with, by the way, also other renewables, significantly cheaper than conventional power sources.
More wind farms like this one are set to come up in the North Sea, and roughly in that direction, far in the distance, is where Denmark plans to build its first energy island. This is a man-made island surrounded by hundreds of turbines, about 80 kilometres from land. The power would be routed directly to neighbouring countries, potentially supplying millions of households. Many of the world's turbines are shipped through this port in Esbjerg. And leaders are meeting here to commit to a huge expansion of offshore wind power.
We need to move away from fossils and have more green electricity. The urgency is real, first of all, because of the climate crisis, obviously, but also because of the situation in Ukraine that really has shown us that this is also a question about energy security.
But it takes 5 to 7 years for new wind farms to be developed. Meanwhile, the use of some fossil fuels has already gone up. Infrastructure at this scale will need deep pockets and lots of innovation.
One of the big challenges with such massive amounts of renewable energy is the intermittency. If you are in a sufficient large scale, you will always have wind or solar somewhere.
This port town was an oil and gas hub, but over the years it's reinvented itself as a gateway for green energy. A sign perhaps of the change this North Sea region might be about to see. Adrian Murray, BBC News, Esbjerg.
Now, still to come on today's programme, dozens of people have reportedly died of heat stroke in Pakistan and India as scientists warn of more frequent extreme heat waves in the region. We have a special report.
If you pay attention enough, a still image can tell a whole story.
Every day when we go out shooting, we're hoping that we're going to get what we call an iconic picture.
I believe that great stories take time.
Just a dream come true. It was almost a sort of pinnacle in a way, and I'm not really sure quite how I'm going to follow it.
We go behind the camera to find out what makes a truly memorable image. My Greatest Shot on BBC World News.
Welcome to Click. We're outside again.
The race is on to decarbonise aviation.
It's like technology telekinesis.
Sensors to track dangerous hotspots. We might be able to stop or even reverse the ageing process.
It won't be long before we're all living in this virtual universe.
AI is changing the world. That's Click on BBC World News.
Welcome back to Global here on BBC World News. Our main stories here. The BBC films patrols by Afghanistan's Department of Vice and Virtue enforcing new strict Islamic laws. And a Russian soldier pleads guilty to killing an unarmed civilian in Ukraine's first war crimes trial since the conflict started. Now, 3 new reports paint stark warnings about the state of our planet. A new UN report warns of record sea levels, ocean heat and gas concentrations in 2021. While a British study says extreme heat waves in South Asia are now more than 100 times more likely because of climate change. Temperatures once predicted to occur every 300 years could now be experienced 3 times every decade. In the current heatwave in India and Pakistan, dozens of people have been reported to have died. Yugita Lamai has this report.
Outdoors in northern India is like the inside of an oven. This work is never easy, but during a heat wave, it can be life-threatening. Dozens have died of heat stroke across India, but millions of workers cannot afford to stop. Chandan Bhuya has travelled 800 miles from home for this job. We face a lot of problems. The skin all over our body burns, and sometimes we feel like we might faint, he says. But we have no choice. We have to work to earn. Heat waves are not uncommon in South Asia, but this year they started earlier than usual and have been more harsh and frequent. In Pakistan, temperatures are touching 50 degrees in some parts. This area of Punjab province is facing a severe drought, putting lives and livelihoods at risk. Mir Lal has moved away from his village to find food and water for his cattle.
I had 35 to 40 cows. About 15 of them died because there was no water. I suffered huge losses. So I have now moved to another village, but it's parched here as well.
Climate change could cause such extreme weather once every 3 years instead of 300 years, experts have warned. Barely any part of the region has been spared from these changes in weather patterns. Here in the west of India, not only are we seeing higher temperatures during the summer, but during the rainy season for the past few years, we've seen cyclones hitting this coast, which is extremely unusual. And many climate experts say that's because surface temperatures of the sea are rising. Hundreds of miles from the coast, this is the Indian state of Assam. Heavy rains arrived early and with more ferocity than normal. People used to seeing floods each year found themselves unprepared. River waters are expected to rise further. This country has a lot of experience saving people from natural disasters. but it now finds itself battling on too many fronts. Yogita Lemay, BBC News, India.
Now, a little earlier on the programme, we got a glimpse of the changing face of Afghanistan with that report from our correspondent about the patrols from the Ministry of Vice and Virtue. Well, now to the second of our special reports, this time on the secret schools that have been set up as the Taliban continues to ban girls from secondary education. Here's Secunda Kamani.
Hidden away in a residential neighbourhood, a small but powerful act of defiance. These teenage girls, like most in the country, have not been allowed back to school by the Taliban, so they're attending lessons secretly. Today's class, trigonometry. For their security, we're not revealing anyone's name or identity.
Are you afraid of what could happen to you?
If they arrest me, they beat me, but it's worth it to do that.
It's worth it.
Of course, it's worth it.
Back in March, it seemed girls' schools were finally reopening, but at the last minute, the Taliban leadership overruled the decision. For students here, the pain is still raw.
On the day we went to school, they told us it's not clear if girls will be allowed or not. Perhaps they will later on. It's been 2 months now and it hasn't happened. It makes me so sad.
Younger girls have been allowed back to school, but it's not clear when or if older girls will be. The Taliban say they need to create the correct Islamic environment first. Taliban officials admit that female education is a sensitive issue for them, with some influential hardliners apparently opposed to it. But in private, others within the group have expressed their disappointment at the decision not to allow all girls' schools to reopen. A number of religious scholars linked to the Taliban have made public declarations in support of the right of girls to learn. Sheikh Rahimullah Haqqani is an Afghan cleric well respected by the Taliban, based in Pakistan. On a recent trip to Kabul, he met senior figures in the group. He's careful not to criticize the continued closure of girls' schools, but has issued a religious decree stating they can and should be educated.
There is no justification in Sharia to say female education is not allowed. No justification at all. All the religious books have stated female education is permissible and obligatory. Because, for example, if a woman gets sick in an Islamic environment like Afghanistan or Pakistan, and needs treatment, it's much better if she is treated by a female doctor.
Boys of all ages are back in the classroom, but the Taliban have now formed a committee to debate what to do about girls' secondary schools. For now, it seems their most hardline elements are the ones deciding what the country's future will look like. Secunda Kamani, BBC News, Kabul.
Now, let me briefly take you back to Ukraine and some pictures from the last few minutes from the capital, Kyiv, because these are scenes from only a few moments ago at the US Embassy, which has just reopened there in the capital. The American flag going up once again. It was shut for 3 months after Russia's invasion, with the American operations working out of Poland. But now they have a new ambassador and they're back there in the capital, Kyiv. So the US Embassy reopening there in Ukraine. Now, before we go, let me take you back and show you the live pictures in Seville, because, of course, fans gathering ahead of the Europa League final. That's a little later tonight between Rangers and the German side Eintracht Frankfurt. 100,000 Rangers supporters expected to be there, another 50,000 from Germany. A huge night of European football. Of course, the big prize, the Europa League, but, of course, the winners get into next season's Champions League as well, and that is so lucrative. So a big night, as I say, and we'll keep you posted here on BBC World News. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Hello, it is technically still